Welcome back to Psyche and Singularity, Jungian Psychology, and Holographic String Theory. So in this video, we're going over the near-death experience of Eben Alexander. So he is a neurosurgeon, and he has taught at many universities such as Harvard Medical School. And in 2008, he contracted E. coli bacteria infection in his brain. So it killed the neocortex, the outer layer of the brain. As he explains, that's the human functioning center of the brain, or the outermost part of the brain, was covered in this infectious pus. And as the infection progressed, the doctors thought he had a 2% chance of living for a few more months in a vegetative state, and that his brain was destroyed and beyond recovery. So he did recover, and then he recounted his near-death experience, which completely changed his life, and also gathered a lot of attention because of what he called his near-death experience a perfect storm of near-death experiences, because he was this highly trained neurosurgeon, and the power of his near-death experience, how vivid it was, and then combined with the fact that he had this E. coli bacteria infecting his brain, he shouldn't have had any consciousness at all. He shouldn't have survived, and when he was in a coma for 7 days, he shouldn't have had any conscious experience whatsoever. And yet he had the super real, super vivid, more real experience of higher dimensional realms, which left him with the impression that we all exist in a megaverse of universes, a multiverse, and that love lay at the center of them all. And he furthermore had a profound experience of the cosmic horizon, where he met God, whom he experienced as the sound vibration Om, or the way he pronounces it, I heard him in a video, Om. And so it's got all of the essential ingredients, although he doesn't mention the strings radiating in from the horizon of the cosmos. He says he felt like he became the universe out at the outermost shell, which he compared to a hen's egg. It's just another reaffirmation of the synthesis that I'm trying to show between Carl Jung's psychology and Leonard Suskind's holographic string theory. So Carl Jung's near-death experience had all of these same characteristics. Well, Carl Jung didn't perceive a megaverse of universes so much, but he did specifically say the past, the present, and the future are interwoven at the horizon of the cosmos, which projects the illusion of three-dimensional space inward on threads. So that was the most profound parallel between Jung's psychology and Suskind's cosmology. Eben Alexander, teaching a neurosurgeon, teaching at Harvard Medical School, it's pretty much the pinnacle of academic brain study. So when he's coming out and saying that this experience completely converted him from a materialist, someone who believes all of our conscious experiences can be reduced to material interactions, chemistry and biology, that was his former belief. That's the predominant belief in academia, although it's, I think, starting to change more and more rapidly. He said after this experience, he completely changed his mind. So I'll go through a little bit of his book, Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's near-death experience and journey into the afterlife, which he published in 2012. It was preceded by a front-page story in the October 8, 2012 edition of Newsweek magazine, and he was interviewed by Oprah. So he did gather a lot of attention. I just saw a video by the Theosophical Society. It had 2 million views. So I think it's just important to bring in his testimony, specifically about the cosmic horizon, which is the big parallel with Suskind's string theory. So, reading here from the book, he explains that in 2008, he was afflicted with a rare case of meningitis caused by E. coli bacteria, which ultimately led him to the conclusion this is a quote, "I was encountering the reality of a world of consciousness that existed completely free of the limitations of my physical brain." We saw Stanislav Grof say the same thing, that near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences induced by LSD, such as in Groff's case, that they prove consciousness is not localized only in the brain. It's not caused by the brain. It exists after the brain dies. It exists when the brain shuts down. And the brain doesn't create consciousness, it just acts like a filter, was Eben Alexander's words. A transformer station is how Carl Jung mentioned it, like a radio or a television. The radio doesn't create the music, it just transforms the electromagnetic radiation that the radio waves are encoded on. I don't know how exactly it works, but it transforms the invisible radiation into something that you can hear. Similarly, the brain transforms consciousness, which permeates the cosmos, into our individual ego consciousnesses that identify with the bodies. So that is what he's saying. An eminent neurosurgeon, expert at the brain, at the structures of the brain and how the brain works and how it's related to consciousness. This is what he's saying. So in his book, I mentioned, he talks a lot about the importance of studying quantum mechanics. He says you don't need to know the math, you just need to know the philosophical implications pointed out by the founders of the theory. And he mentions Werner Heisenberg and Wolfgang Pauli and so many of the others, Erwin Schrödinger. They all, to my knowledge, they all were mystics to one degree or another, believing that consciousness is interwoven with the cosmos. Quantum Questions, edited by Ken Wilber, is a great source where he quotes all of the founders of quantum mechanics, and including Einstein, and they all believed to some degree that consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. It's not a byproduct of the brain. So he does not mention string theory. I think he would be interested to see how his near-death experience is very closely related or similar to Susskind's holographic string theory. He does say that the world's a hologram and that the brain is a hologram. So he's falling right in line with what I'm trying to do with the synthesis of Jung and Susskind. So, all right, so let me just from memory, so I don't have to keep reading here, describe what he said about his near-death experience. So after he went into a coma, he said the first level, there's 3 levels that he experienced, and the first was the earthworm's eye view, which was this murky underground, like an earthworm might see. And he mentioned blood vessels and roots, and he heard a constant hammering sound, and there was just no response from this realm. There was no consciousness to it. And he had total amnesia of his previous life as Eben Alexander. But eventually, he said, a spinning ball of light with tendrils coming off of it and a beautiful melody associated with it rent open the earthworm's eye view realm. And then he entered this glorious green meadow filled with a conscious ecosystem. So he found himself to be a speck on the wing of a beautiful, colorful, telepathic butterfly who was one in a flock of millions of them swirling around, flying through this meadow. And they would swoop down into the meadow, and he would see flowers opening and the buds on trees opening and people dancing, souls, dressed in peasant clothes, but beautiful colors. And above were what he called these golden orbs flying in formation, like I guess kind of like jets flying in formation, but they had streamers of gold, and hymns, chants would fall from them. And these waves upon waves of these blessed sound vibrations would fill everybody with this potent tsunami of love that everyone felt, and that was fueling the festive atmosphere of all of this entire meadow, which he called the Gateway Meadow. And also he mentions that on the wing of this butterfly, he saw a beautiful girl who told him telepathically that you are loved and cherished and you don't have to fear anything. You will be taken care of. And then he comes back to who that girl was at the end of the book. And it's kind of, he winds it all up. And I'll give a spoiler alert because I'm giving a video on his book. It turns out that the girl was his biological sister, whom he'd never met and who had died 2 years before this near-death experience. He was given up for adoption. Later he found his birth parents. They later remarried and had more children. So one of those children he met, one of his siblings, sent him a picture of the sibling who had died when she was 36, and it was the girl that he met on the butterfly wing. You know, you would think, oh, this guy's, his brain was totally toast, and so he's having crazy hallucinations. He says, no, my brain was totally toast. It was completely covered in pus. When a doctor stuck a needle in his spinal cord, this white pus spurted out under pressure. So his whole nerve endings, the entire consciousness producing apparatus, if you believe consciousness is produced by the brain, was disengaged. And he was having these hyperreal, super vivid experiences that he said makes our world here seem dreamlike in comparison. So getting back to his near-death experience account, the choirs of angels, that he called them, flying in formation and releasing these hymns of ecstatic love, created a portal to the next realm, which he calls the core. And the core is the horizon of the cosmos. Inky black, but overspilling with light, is one of the ways he describes it. And I'll go back and read some of the quotes about the core, because it's very similar to Carl Jung's description of the horizon of the cosmos during his near-death experience and Leonard Susskind's description. And he said that when he went through this portal created by the choirs of angels, another beautiful light, brighter than millions of stars, he said, appeared before him as a mediator between him and the supreme divine core, which he said the sound that he heard coming from it was Om, or Om, O-M. And he said it was only later that people told him how important that syllable is for various religions, especially Hinduism. And I'll read a little bit from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, I am the syllable Om. Of vibrations, I am the syllable Om. I am Om and the sound of the ether. And the ether is the word is translated from Akasha. That's this horizon of the cosmos where the past, present, and future are superimposed according to Hindu cosmology. So that there's a lot of parallels with the things we've been going over. Okay, so I'll actually use this computer version so I don't have to look down. I want to read a little bit of his, well, here's one of his descriptions of the implications that he sees happening from his near-death experience. He says, those implications are tremendous beyond description. My experience showed me that the death of the body and the brain are not the end of consciousness, that human experience continues beyond the grave. More important, it continues under the gaze of a God who loves and cares about each one of us, and about where the universe itself and all the beings within it are ultimately going. So he also mentions that after pointing out Heisenberg and Pauli and Schrödinger all thought consciousness is interwoven in the fabric of the cosmos, he says that there is no unified theory of everything that can combine the laws of quantum mechanics with those of relativity theory in a way that begins to incorporate consciousness. So that's exactly what I'm trying to do in the book. He's saying there's no unified theory of everything that can combine quantum mechanics and general relativity. As I've discussed in previous videos, that's the holy grail for physicists. How do you reconcile quantum mechanics, the physics of the very small, and general relativity, the physics of the very heavy? And string theory tries to do that. Well, he's saying, okay, but there's no theory that combines consciousness, that can incorporate consciousness into a union of quantum mechanics and general relativity. And what I'm saying is the synthesis of Jung's psychology and Suskind's holographic string theory, which he developed with Gerard 't Hooft, that is the unified theory that Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli predicted. They predicted because mind and matter both emanate from the ultimate source, the unus mundus, the archetype of the self, which Plato called the idea of the good. Since mind and matter are coming out from the same source, the laws of physics should parallel or mirror the laws of psychology. That's a prediction made by two scientists. And I'm saying the evidence for that prediction is, one of the most profound pieces of evidence is the parallels between Jung's near-death experience and Suskind's holographic string theory. And that parallel is very powerfully supported by Eben Alexander's recounting of his near-death experience. So I'd like to see his book counted as evidence in favor of the unified theory of synthesizing Jung's psychology and Suskind's string theory. So let me just scroll down here a little bit more. So here is his description of this outermost horizon of the cosmos. After he goes through the portal created by the chorus of angels, he said, "I continued moving forward and found myself entering an immense void, completely dark, infinite in size, yet also infinitely comforting. Pitch black as it was also brimming over with light, a light that seemed to come from a brilliant orb that I now sensed near me. My situation was, strangely enough, something akin to that of a fetus in a womb. In this case, the mother was God, the creator, the source, who is responsible for making the universe and all in it. Om was the sound I remembered hearing associated with that omniscient, omnipotent, and unconditionally loving God. But any descriptive word falls short. It was as if I were being born into a larger world, and the universe itself was like a giant cosmic womb, and the orb was guiding me through this process." Later, when I was back here in the world, I found a quotation by the 17th century Christian poet Henry Vaughan that came close to describing this place, this vast inky black core that was the home of the divine itself. "There is, some say, in God a deep but dazzling darkness." That was it exactly, an inky darkness that was also full to brimming with light. Through the orb, Om told me that there is not one universe, but many, in fact, more than I could conceive, but that love lay at the center of them all. So that is the main parallel that I'm pointing out with Suskind's holographic string theory of information conservation at the horizon of the cosmos, this inky dark but overbrimming with light. Well, how can it be both? Well, looking for parallels with Suskind's theory, the horizon of the cosmos is where the fabric of space-time is expanding away from our central perspective on Earth. In every direction, it's expanding away from us at an accelerating rate that reaches the speed of light at the horizon of the cosmos. Past that, it's expanding faster than light, so that not even light can get back in. So in that respect, it's completely dark because it radiates no light. Light can't get back in past it. But just according, and this was the crucial part of Suskind's theory of information conservation. He was trying to save the principle of information conservation from Stephen Hawking's claim that information is swallowed inside a black hole. Susskind said, yes, it is from one perspective if you follow it past the event horizon, but if you stay outside and observe it falling to the black hole, as that information approaches the event horizon, it gets smeared out into its original string structure, which slows down and smears out all over the surface, and then leaks back out with the Hawking radiation. And if you turn a black hole inside out, which is the Big Bang, now instead of contracting toward a singularity, space-time is expanding away from it at an exponential rate, and then it reaches the speed of light at the horizon of the cosmos, where that information is conserved from our perspective inside the universe looking out, smeared out on a holographic film just in front of the point of no return. And then the cosmic microwave background radiation radiates that conserved information on that infinitely hot film just in front of the horizon of the cosmos. It like a letter carrier it radiates it back in to create the illusion, the holographic cinema of three-dimensional space. That's Susskind's theory. So simultaneously inky black and yet overbrimming with light. That is how Eben Alexander describes the horizon of the cosmos. It's consistent with Susskind's string theory. So is his claim that it's the mother of the universe. Why would you consider that outermost horizon the mother unless it gives birth to the universe? And that was not the theory until holographic string theory. The Big Bang said the singularity in the center of the universe gives birth to the universe, but not the outermost horizon. But now, according to string theory, it does. Also, it absorbs all the information of the universe like a mother and then radiates it back in. We saw St. Augustine compare the outermost horizon of the cosmos to the mother of God, the house of God. The mother substance is what Plato described it as in the Timaeus. And here we see Eben Alexander saying it's the same, it's like the mother. Furthermore, comparing it to the sound, the syllable Om, which is what Krishna identifies himself as in the Bhagavad Gita, as well as the Akashic outermost sphere. And all right, so also, this is the part of Eben Alexander's near-death experience account that Jung's didn't have, is that Om told me there's not one universe but many, in fact more than I could conceive, but that love lay at the center of them all. All right, so he's got the whole idea of a multiverse, and love lay at the center of them all. So at the center of every universe is the singularity from which it expands. This point of infinite love. So in the book I talk about how that is reminiscent of the cosmologist Brian Swimm's equation, gravity is love, or gravity equals love. So Brian Swimm was on my dissertation committee along with Sean Kelly at the California Institute of Integral Studies. They're both professors of mine, and that was one of his, he's written several books. He co-authored Journey of the Universe. He wrote The Universe Story, from the primordial flaring forth to the Ecozoic era. I'm looking here at his Amazon site. So at any rate, he created an Emmy Award-winning documentary, Journey of the Universe, the epic story of cosmic Earth and human transformation. One of his trying to put the human story in the context of the cosmic story. So one of the metaphors he uses is that gravity is love. When I first heard that, I thought, oh, that's a little hokey. Gravity is love. A lot of times when I'm introduced to things at first, I think it's a little hokey, and then I start to really respect. Later, I realize, oh, I was hokey for thinking that was hokey. This is an important piece of information. This whole gravity is love. If the equation psyche equals singularity is true, and I base that on Jung's equation, psyche equals highest intensity in the smallest space, so that's a singularity, then a singularity is a point of infinite gravity. And if gravity is love, then a singularity is a point of infinite love, which is exactly what Eben Alexander said Om told him in the center of every universe is love, is God's love, infinite love. So continuing here, here's another parallel with Hindu cosmology. They both have a multiverse of universes for Eben Alexander, there's God at the outermost horizon and at the central point. And similarly in Hindu cosmology, Vishnu, there's a Vishnu incarnation in the center of every universal bubble. And furthermore, Krishna, who's a Vishnu form in the Bhagavad Gita, claims he's the supreme Vishnu. He's also identifies with the outermost Akashic sphere. And of course, also in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, of vibrations I am the transcendental syllable Om. He says, everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. O son of Kunti, I am the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon. The syllable Om in the Vedic mantras, I am the sound in ether and ability in man. So there's a lot of parallels between Eben Alexander's near-death experience and Hindu cosmology in particular with the multiverse and the Akashic outermost sphere. And another point that I get into in the book is in the Hindu cosmology, as well as in Plato's cosmology, there's the soul in the center of the universe, the soul of the universe, and then it has these concentric spheres of elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then in Hindu cosmology, in a lot of texts, there's three more subtle material spheres: mind, intelligence, false ego. It's the outermost sphere. Beyond that, the universes are floating in the ocean of Brahman, so it's spiritual. So here's some points that are similar to that in Eben Alexander's near-death experience. So he said he went from this Om, the outermost point of the universe, where he became one with the universe, it seemed to him, back down to the earthworm's eye view through that beautiful meadow of the flocks of butterflies, up and down various times. And his descriptions of doing that have some similarity to the Hindu cosmology of these spheres of elements. So here he goes, talking about going through that meadow with all of the self-aware ecosystem, the lush green meadow of everything's happy and alive. He says, seeing and hearing were not separate in this place where I now was. It seemed that you could not look at or listen to anything in this world without becoming a part of it, without joining with it in some mysterious way. A warm wind blew through, a divine breeze. It changed everything, shifting the world around me into an even higher octave, a higher vibration. So octave is 8, the 8 notes of an octave. And similarly, there's 8 spheres of elements in Hindu cosmology: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. So when he talks about a divine breeze, I see a similarity with the sphere of the cosmos of the air element. And then he's describing after the divine breeze, he said, thoughts entered me directly. These thoughts were solid and immediate, hotter than fire and wetter than water. So he's mentioning these elements, the wind, the fire, and the water, but they're more solid and real than the fire we experience in the material world. Like they're the archetypal forms of fire and water and air. And I'm just saying that does seem similar to the Hindu cosmology, along with these other similarities, like the multiverse idea. So you would expect, okay, well, let's look at the parallels here. There's the earthworm's eye view, so that's the earth element. And then he's in the green meadow, where he experiences a divine breeze, and he experienced thought forms, the archetypal forms of fire and water. So we've got all these different elements. The next one you would expect him to experience is after earth, water, fire, air, the divine breeze, you would experience the ether, or the outermost horizon, which is the border between the subtle material and the gross material. But in some models, they only have to show 5 of these spheres, and ether is the outermost one. So you would expect him to experience that next. And that's what he describes as the horizon of the cosmos, the core. That would correspond to the ether, where he heard Om, which is exactly what the Hindu cosmology says, that it's the sound of the ether. Krishna says, I am Om, I'm the sound of the ether and the ability in man. So as he's out at the core, this infinitely inky blackness that's brimming over with light, the source of the universe, here is how he describes a little more of that experience. He says, just as my awareness was both individual, yet at the same time completely unified with the universe, so also did the boundaries of what I experienced as myself at times contract and at other times expand to include all that exists throughout eternity. The blurring of the boundary between my awareness and the realm around me went so far at times that I became the entire universe. An analogy I often use to demonstrate my consciousness at that deepest level is that of a hen's egg. I sensed strongly that the creative, primordial, and then in parentheses, yes, prime mover, it's a an allusion to Aristotle. The prime mover aspect of God was the shell around the egg's contents, intimately associated throughout, as our consciousness is a direct extension of the divine, yet forever beyond the capability of absolute identification with the consciousness of the created. So that got a little convoluted there. He says, I never heard Om's voice directly, nor saw Om's face. It was as if Om spoke to me through thoughts that were like wave walls rolling through me. So right there's more important parallels with holographic string theory and with Carl Jung's near-death experience. So at times he felt himself contract, and at other times expand to include everything throughout eternity, and he became the whole universe. So he became the past, the present, and the future of the universe, specifically out at the border of the cosmos, which he compares to the shell around an egg's contents. And he mentioned the primordial aspect of God, the prime mover. So we saw Dante following Aquinas and Augustine and Aristotle and Plato. In the Divine Comedy, he depicted God's throne as a brilliant point of light out at the outermost sphere of the universe. And that's the first mover, the unmoved mover, the source of everything. And just identifying that source with the outermost encompassing sphere, we just saw how that idea repeats throughout history. And he, like Stanislav Grof as well, he became the physical universe somehow. He said, I was back to the Big Bang. So again, a big part of the parallels with near-death experiences and 20th century cosmology is that the farther you look out in space, according to relativity theory, the farther back in time you're looking. At the farthest reaches, you're back at the Big Bang. That is the horizon of the cosmos, and that is what people feel. Now, Eben Alexander, he mentions people having this life review where they experience their entire lives, their whole lives flash before them in intense detail, and they experience not only their own emotional state, but that of the people they're dealing with. Although he says his near-death experience was unusual in the sense that he had no recollection of who he had been in his previous life before the coma. But he does in his book and in videos he gives talk about this remembering your whole life. So that's important. If you look out in space, you see, for example, the sun where it was 8 minutes ago. And the light shining off of my body is now entering into space so that it's conserved. The past, the present, and the future are conserved throughout space-time. If you look farther out in space, you go farther back in time, you're going farther back in your own personal biography. So if consciousness is interwoven with space-time, then when you die, your consciousness leaves its connection to your physical body and brain, you start expanding out like space-time will do, and you then remember the past. The idea of a life review is consistent with the theory that consciousness is interwoven with expanding fabric of space-time. All right, so I'm going to conclude here now with his quote, "The place I went was real in a way that makes the life we're living here and now completely dreamlike by comparison." So we saw Carl Jung say the same thing. He says, everything here that I experienced was absolutely real. And in comparison, this is like a dreary gray world of little boxes of prison. We're all imprisoned in a little box of three-dimensional space, tethered to the horizon of the cosmos by a thread. That was the key parallel that got this whole book going between Jung's near-death experience and Suskind's holographic string theory. Now we've seen Eben Alexander, eminent neurosurgeon, who had taught at Harvard Medical School, confirming most of the parallels between Jungian psychology and Suskind's holographic string theory. So my question is, at what point does the evidence become powerful enough to demand some kind of a transformation, if nowhere else, at least in academia, where the default worldview is the materialist, that consciousness can be reduced to material interactions. I think that has been sufficiently disproven by expert testimony, like Jung's and Alexander's and Groff's, and especially when you see the parallels between their testimony and Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory. I think that puts the evidence over the hump required to say this worldview is more reasonable than the one that is predominant in society today. And I'm hoping that sooner rather than later that will be the case, in which case I can imagine a wonderful cultural revolution. I know that Wolfgang Pauli thought, I don't know if psychology and physics will ever be married together, ever be unified, but it's the most beautiful thing I could think of for both of them. So I think, expert testimony like Alexander's brings us closer to that reunion of science and psychology, of physics and psychology, upon which a new worldview and a new culture can be established.